Welcome to another episode of Disguise Coverage, part of the Cover One Sports Network. And this is a special episode tonight. I guess every episode is a special episode. I don't want to knock any other episode, but tonight's guest is a favorite of mine. Again, no disrespect to any other guests who have been on the show, but also we had a bit of a significant news cycle dropping today in the NFL for the Buffalo Bills. It's also kind of reached not a pinnacle, but it started to peak a little bit with the rest of the news that has come through earlier in this week and over the weekend. And it's a good night to podcast. And it's a good night to have the guest that I have on for this episode of Disguise Coverage, Mr. Bruce Nolan, host of the Bruce Exclusive on Buffalo Rumblings. Bruce, thank you for coming on again, as always. And how you doing?
Dude, Anthony, I'm fantastic. It's just disco balls and dancers all day long. I mean, I don't know how you could possibly not be having a great time with roster moves. I mean, there's nothing to talk about. Basically, boring day in the NFL, nothing really to talk about. Yeah, I'm good. Basic. Same old stuff.
Nothing of importance. No news on the salary cap. No moves that are really important or pertinent to the Buffalo Bills this offseason or going forward. Just a really slow, boring, ho-hum kind of day. And no, that's the opposite of what has happened. Bruce is here to talk about the free agency expectations for the Buffalo Bills this offseason. The initial premise of this episode from Bruce and I was to sort of rein in a bit of the talk and thought and expectation as well around the Buffalo Bills this offseason. There has been, it's almost kind of become a running joke now on Twitter. Anytime someone is released, anytime someone is cut, anytime someone does anything good or nice at a combine or a time, there are just so many people throwing out like, oh, the Bills should sign this guy, or this guy's going to go to the Bills, or this guy's going to do this. And just off of the nature of the salary cap and rosters, all of these people that are consistently being linked to the Bills, they can't physically or actually or in reality become a member of the Buffalo Bills because it's just not physically or realistically possible. So Bruce and I wanted to go through the priority needs positions of the Buffalo Bills and go through and talk about what to realistically expect this offseason from these position groupings, and with a main focus on free agency, but also a bit with an eye towards the NFL draft, because if you can't fill everything through free agency, you have to fill it through the draft. And in this episode, we will be defining the term realistically by three criteria. One, availability at that position, basically meaning how many players exist at that position in the open market and in the draft. Obviously, the more players there are, more quality players there are at a position, that creates, more supply. It's the laws of supply and demand. It's almost like economics. Less quality players, there's more positional scarcity. You got to spend more draft resources, monetary resources to acquire and fill that need. Second aspect in terms of realistic fit, scheme or culture fit. We don't want to grab a guy who's a 3-4 inside linebacker because the Bills don't do that, so it doesn't fit. Third, cap space and anticipated costs. So those are the three things we're looking at when we define the term realistic expectations. So the availability at the position, the scheme and the culture fit, and then the Bills cap space and the anticipated cost of that player. But before we start to get into that, as Bruce alluded to earlier, and as he and I both made sarcastic and witty, hilarious jokes about, there was some news that dropped today, and it's been a bit of a pattern over the last couple of days. So we had the Mitch Morse restructure over the last several days, and then today, Wednesday, March 10th, the Bills made some announcements. The Bills cut wide receiver John Brown. They cut defensive lineman Quentin Jefferson, commonly known as Q Jeff in my condo association. And they also restructured the contract of Vernon Butler. That means certain things for this team now, and it means certain things going forward. We'll start with John Brown. And Bruce, I'm going to pass it to you here because I'm a little sad in my heart, but I recognize the necessary evil of it. What are your thoughts here on the John Brown release?
I think that the pivotal thing with this release is going to be, are the Bills releasing John Brown because they believe in Gabriel Davis as wide receiver 2, or are they releasing John Brown because they want to fill that role in a more economic way? Now, both of those things can be true because a fourth round, second year player like Gabriel Davis is doing it in a more economical way. And Brandon Beane talked about this last year at the combine when he was talking about, sometimes you bring in a rookie and they may not necessarily beat out the veteran right away, but they get valuable playing time. They get used to the system. They flash a little bit, and then you can maybe let the veteran go and they can beat him out year 2. And then you can let that veteran walk and you can use that money elsewhere. He specifically said those things, which apply exactly to this situation. So maybe they released John Brown because they were going to anyway, because they believe Gabriel Davis is capable of being wide receiver 2, in which case they would rather utilize that capital elsewhere. Or maybe they released John Brown, and that's mostly because of an economic fashion. And they say, okay, I think we can fill a field stretcher. They can fill a role like John Brown would fill if he wasn't just wide receiver 2, right? If he wasn't getting the targets that wide receiver 2 gets, and now you're looking at more of a specialist role, maybe you can fill that cheaper. Maybe they envisioned John Brown's role for 2021 as being a role that you can fill more economically. Maybe, hey, well, if we need a fast guy, we can go get a fast guy. If I need a field stretcher, I can go get one. So that's going to be really interesting because I think this is the first of 2 dominoes to fall that will tell us what they think about John Brown and Gabriel Davis. The first one was, are they going to keep him or not? That decision has been made. The next one is, what will they do at the wide receiver position? If they add nobody at the wide receiver position that is a threat for wide receiver 2, then that tells you that they think it's Gabriel Davis. If they add a more economic speedster, someone potentially like Kenny Stills, who's been a vertical receiver, then that tells you something different. So I think that in order for us to properly ascertain what the staff is trying to do here, you might need a second domino to fall to make that happen. And I know that we've had people in the comments, Nick in the comments said that he would be happy to have John Brown back at $3 to $5 million a year. I would love that too. My guess based on his Instagram post is that if you were going to cut John Brown with the idea that you'd like him back cheaper, you probably would have told him that at the time you released him, which means he probably wouldn't have said, hey, peace out, Buffalo. It's been real. Thanks for 2 years. So my guess is that's not happening.
That's fair. I would second that notion. With that, you see so many guys who, especially if they know kind of like, all right, well, we'll see what's going to happen going forward. They kind of keep that a little more in-house. And with him doing exactly like you said, that proverbial, hey, it's been real. Thank you guys so much. Peace out. It would point to him not coming back, which it hurts my heart a little. John Brown, bless his heart, functioning as that number 1 receiver for us 2 seasons ago, and then just was such an ideal number 2, along with Cole Beasley in the slot when we acquired Stephon Diggs and the role that he played. But the writing, I don't want to say was completely on the wall for this move this offseason, but with the cap space he was occupying prior to today, he had the 6th largest cap hit on the Bills roster at $9.53 million. That's roughly a 5% amount of the entire cap space that was taken up for the Bills. And then with only having the dead cap hit of 1.6, it was something that was talked about all offseason, whether it was going to be a restructure or a pay cut or a cut. And so the writing was on the wall decently for that, unfortunately, and cutting him now saves $8 million, which is massive. Well, 7.93, but I'm rounding up. And I think what you touched on is a very key point, because now seeing what the Bills do going forward to fill his spot, quote unquote, do they not add anything? And is it just, hey, we love what Gabriel Davis can do, and we're excited to see what Isaiah Hodgins looks like coming into year 2, and we can gadget some things with Isaiah McKenzie. We feel whole at the position. We're okay. Or do they add some piece? I know I'm not necessarily one of them, but a lot of Bills fans who have been clamoring for, hey, cut John Brown and bring in John Ross because we just need a speed guy to stretch the field. Do the Bills do something akin to that to bring in someone on the cheap, like you said, economical value to just fill that deep role? Kenny Stills is still a name that is in circulation. I think it's very interesting because, again, to your point, making this move at this time, and based on what John Brown said, for all intents and purposes at this very moment, it does not look like he's returning. So that means trying to get in the head of Brandon Beane, which is hard to do because the man is a wizard. There's either something else coming or the Bills feel comfortable with what they got. And it's just a matter of, no, we can cut him, we're okay at the position, or there's something else to fill into that role. If you got to decide that, are you comfortable with the wide receiver room as is now, or would you like to bring in someone on the cheap to fill that vertical stretch role that John Brown, and I feel a little not disrespectful to John Brown because his route running really improved. I know he's still known as he's still smoke. He's still that vertical stretch guy, but that was his primary function. But yeah, do you want to bring in somebody on the cheap to fill that niche role, or are you comfortable with what we got?
So I'm not comfortable with what the Bills have, mostly because I'm not someone who believes in the assumption of improvement. And I think sometimes we do that sometimes. We fall into this trap when it comes to rookie to second-year players, and we assume they're going to break out. We assume they're going to improve. And we've seen a lot of circumstances where that's not the case. Now, we should be hopeful that they improve, but we shouldn't bank everything on it. And when you have a wide receiver-focused team that is pass happy, I don't think it's wise to assume it. Now, you might say, goodness gracious, Bruce, this had one of the best possible offenses, and John Brown wasn't healthy for most of the year. That's right. And there were plenty of times over the course of last year when Gabriel Davis proved that he's still a rookie and potentially shouldn't be entrusted with the wide receiver 2 spot. And, I hear people talk about John Ross a lot because he's an economical option. He's fast. The thing about John Ross, and the thing that's really interesting about John Ross, is he's not a good football player.
Correct.
That's the thing that's fascinating to me about John Ross, is that he's not good at playing the game of football.
He's just fast.
So we know lots of fast people. And the thing I think is funny about this is that the Buffalo Bills and Bills fans are very, very aware of what fast people who can't play football are like. So we all know who TJ Graham was. We've seen these fast guys who can't play. We know them, but yet for some reason, when somebody else has them, we don't recognize them. But when we have them, then we recognize them. I'll never forget, there were people clamoring for Darius Hayward-Bay. That was a thing. So fast by itself is not equitable with good. And also, this is really important. Being a good vertical threat is more than just being fast. Can we talk about this for a second?
Oh, beautiful.
Being a good vertical receiver is about so much more than just being fast. There is a route running technique to vertical routes. Stacking a corner is a talent. Tracking the ball is a talent. These are all things that matter, right? Being able to make sure that you are just where the ball needs to be. It's like people shagging balls in the outfield for baseball. There is a talent to tracking balls in flight. That's a real thing that happens. In addition, there's a specific skill. It's not just, I'm going to run fast in a straight line. That's not what vertical routes are. No. There's about how you release. There's about inside, outside. It's about sideline awareness. It's about stacking the corner. All of these things are traits that go into being a good vertical receiver. John Brown has them. John Ross doesn't. So I'm not necessarily comfortable, but I'm not going to freak out. Would I like to see Kenny Stills back? Yes. I think that would be an ideal economic option. Someone who has had success in that vertical Devery Henderson sort of style role. I know it's a kind of a callback, throwback name. But
Devery Henderson of Saints fame.
I know, right? And Kenny Stills, of course, was at one point in New Orleans Saints. So
yeah,
I'm bringing it all together, man.
It's connected. I like it.
So I think that could maybe ease my concerns a little bit, because if potentially you have a scenario where Gabriel Davis doesn't improve and the assumption of improvement does not come to fruition, then you at least have a veteran who's been there and has done that and has filled that specific role. So I would like to see Kenny Stills back, and I would feel much more comfortable if he was.
I second that notion completely. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I have a similar thought in that potential aspect, and banking on potential and banking on hope and banking on progression and jump when it comes to another position that we'll be talking about later in the show. But I'm in that same boat. I recognize potential, and player A should see another jump. And based on what they did in the previous year, we can expect them and we can chart and track. I get it, understand it, completely recognize it. I don't like banking a team on hope and potential. I want some sort of assuredness. I want some sort of known commodity, proven commodity. I want that. I recognize the aspect of a high ceiling, just like in fantasy football. I love the idea of a high ceiling, those boom players. It's fantastic. But there's also something to be said for that high floor, that safe aspect of what you're going to get, that proven commodity. And I think that's a very important point for everybody I love what Gabe Davis did. Sorry, Gabriel Davis. He likes to go by Gabriel. I liked what he did in his rookie year. He had some issues. He had some drops, but he made a lot of great catches. He showed a lot of tremendous potential. But as much as I like him, I, much like you, am not ready to be like, oh yeah, cool, run him out at wide receiver 2. He's fine. This is not Madden. Much like in that vertical aspect of the game, people don't realize, guys aren't just getting like free releases where it's going to be like, okay, cool, I'm just going to run as fast as I can when the quarterback snaps it, and I'm going to run past the corner completely. Corners are athletic. They have technique. They have scheme. It's easy to scheme over the top. It's easy to scheme underneath. And if you're not, I love the point that you made about sideline awareness. You might have a guy, I've seen John Ross literally do that so much where he just burns up the sideline, but his positioning doesn't give the quarterback anywhere to put the ball. So the quarterback has to make like this absolute pinpoint perfect laser dime throw, because where John Ross ran his route between the sideline and the corner, he's given his quarterback no room for error. And that's a very big thing in deep threats in general, along with tracking the ball. That's a big thing. And I'm sad to see John Brown go, but I much like you, I would like to see that Kenny Stills piece. I want to have that known commodity. I think it's awesome to hope and recognize the potential that Gabriel Davis has, but I'm not ready to sit here and bank on the fact that he's ready for wide receiver number 2. And I do agree. I think I don't think Bean and co are willing to do that as well. We start to shift gears here, as you notice on the bottom there, where the graphic shows John Brown, Q Jeff, Vernon Butler. These two are tied to each other a little bit. Quentin Jefferson and Vernon Butler. So Quentin Jefferson was cut today. Vernon Butler was not. He was restructured, and he restructured / took a pay cut. Bruce, I know you have some thoughts on this that mirror similar thoughts of mine. I'm a little not pleased, and I know you are quote unquote mildly displeased about the Jefferson release and the Vernon Butler staying.
I am. I'm disappointed we didn't have an opportunity to see Quentin Jefferson do the things that I thought he was going to do when he got here, and that he did effectively for Seattle in 2019. Now, I've said this before, and I don't think it's a hot take, but other people thought so. Quentin Jefferson was the best pass rusher on the Seattle Seahawks in 2019. Huh? And because there was a former number 1 overall pick in Jadeveon Clowney on that team, people think I'm insane, but I'm not. And his ability to kick outside to base end, sitting at 6'4", 291, and then kick inside on pass rushing downs.
Beautiful.
This is a really important trait. And he didn't get to show any of it because he was rotating at 1 tech. And you didn't see Quentin Jefferson do the thing that Quentin Jefferson does. Mm-hmm. If you put him at shade, he is not going to give you the thing that you thought you were going to get when you sign him. So it's a little bit like if you sign a tackle and you move him to guard, and then you complain that he sucks at guard, and then you cut him. Well, okay, but
playing out of position.
You playing out of position. So if that logic applies to Ed Oliver, which we do, and that's the funny thing.
Yes,
we accept that logic applies to Ed Oliver this year, but we do not extend that same grace to Quentin Jefferson, who was in the same boat as Ed Oliver and was playing out of position. So if Star Lotulelei comes back and we get reasonable 1 tech play from a combination of him and or Harrison Phillips and or a draft pick and or a free agent signing and or any of that stuff, then all of a sudden Quentin Jefferson and Ed Oliver can do the things you brought them in to do. But you cut them before you had a chance to see the things you brought him in to do. Now, is there a chance that they approached Quentin Jefferson and Vernon Butler, both with the pay cut, and essentially broke a pool cue over their knees, dropped them in front of them and said, we're going to have tryouts?
Nice Dark Knight reference.
Is that a possibility? Yes, I think that's a possibility.
Who wants to join our team?
Who wants to join our team? And we're going to have tryouts. And the impression needs a little bit of work. The Bane impression is better. I will openly say my Bane impression is markedly better, but I'm working on it. You deserve better, Anthony, and I will give you better. Okay, I promise.
I appreciate it. It's the effort that counts. I appreciate you.
It really is, and it matters to me to do a good job for you and the listeners and the people in the comment section right now. But is there a chance they went to both parties and said, "Hey, whichever one of you wants to take a pay cut, we'll get, and whichever one of you doesn't want to take a pay cut, we'll cut"? Sure, yeah, that's a possibility. We're never going to know that behind the scenes, right. But I would have rather had Quentin Jefferson at his current 2021 cap hit and no Vernon Butler than Vernon Butler on a reduced cap hit and no Quentin Jefferson.
Yeah, I really thought with Starr coming back, Greg Thompson and I spoke about it in this Buffalo Bills salary cap special episode that we did. Much like the writing was on the wall for John Brown, I thought the writing was similarly on the wall for Vernon Butler. I thought he was going to be gone. He had the 10th largest cap hit on the Bills at $7.8 million. He only had a dead cap hit of $1 million. I thought with Starr coming back and that defensive tackle rotation, again, because Butler is, no disrespect to him, he's limited in his positional versatility. And so looking at that defensive tackle spot and having Starr, Harrison Phillips, Ed Oliver, Justin Zimmer, just kind of felt like Butler was odd man out, especially with comparison to Quentin Jefferson, whose positional versatility, you hit the nail on the head, we never really got to experience. We talked about it a lot with Ed Oliver, like you alluded to, the fact that he had to wear multiple hats that he wasn't ideally suited for, and the impact that Starr opting out had on Butler or had on Ed Oliver, but also had that impact on Quentin Jefferson. And for a team like the Bills, who ideally want to rush for, and they may simulate a lot of pressures and they may disguise a lot of coverages, pun, they want to rush for. And in order to consistently rush for, you need to have roughly 6 to 7 guys, horses in the stable who you can rotate out and keep fresh and who can add quality when they get subbed in. And the fact that Quentin Jefferson can line up in multiple spots on your defensive line, I thought was such a fantastic chess piece. And with Starr coming back, the big talk was, great, now we get to see Ed Oliver take another jump potentially because he doesn't have to play the one tech, so on and so forth. I thought it was almost just as equally important for Quentin Jefferson, and I really thought we were going to see a lot of good things from him. There was so much positive buzz last offseason, and I'm not just trying to bang the drum for myself. He was a player I was most excited to see on the Bills defense this past year prior to Starr opting out. I thought he was going to add an awesome piece. I was really excited. Again, you hit the nail on the head. I thought he was a tremendous part of that Seattle defensive front, although Clowney was the guy who got all the names. And when you're playing on a defense with Clowney and Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. But I really thought we had a chance to unlock him this year. And I get the aspect that you mentioned, and Taylor also mentioned it in the comments. If they did that Joker pool Q scenario and Jefferson was like, no, I'm not having it, I get it and I understand it. And I think my sadness is mitigated slightly, as yours is, by Butler restructuring and taking a cap hit. So I understand, but I really liked what Jefferson added, and I was not shocked. I was surprised to see that news. Again, it mitigated a little bit once I saw the Butler restructure, but a bit surprised and also a bit sad in my heart. That got me in the feels a little bit, just because I felt like he was untapped and we never got to really see it. And someone else who had to play in some ways this past season and weren't ideally suited for him, Mitch Morse, who also restructured over the previous several days. What are your thoughts on Mitch Morse? Did you want him gone? Are you one of the people in Bills Mafia who think he's the worst center in the history of the world and needs to go? Or are you more rational and logistical in your thinking?
Anthony, please tell me that there aren't actually people who think Mitch Morse is the worst center in the history of the world.
Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there are people who think he's not good and should have been cut and not on the Bills.
There was a narrative going around about potentially re-signing John Feliciano, kicking him over to center, and then cutting Mitch Morse. And I was absolutely not having it. Mitch Morse, in my opinion, is a markedly better center than John Feliciano. And I am very pleased to have Mitch Morse as the starting center of this team. So I'm happy that he restructured the contract to stick around. I am pleased that he's there. I do hope that Dable will make better usage of his talents in 2021 And I think that probably getting a better guard next to him on either side will help out a lot.
Yes.
Because Mitch Morse, one of the benefits of Mitch Morse is between the ears. Mitch Morse has never been a dominant drive blocker who's going to create space by moving large men out of the way against their will. And one of the bad things about being competent is that sometimes, we all know this from our current jobs. Everyone in their current jobs has had a scenario at some point where they were so competent at their job that you got asked to do someone else's job. And that kind of sucks. And I feel like that was Mitch Morse in 2020. And because the guard spots were kind of weak, sometimes you could see on film that Mitch Morse was having to pick up the slack for less than stellar guard play next to him. And I have a feeling that we're kind of pushing that under the rug a little bit, because we understood it. It's like the L. Oliver thing. Sometimes we understand something intrinsically when it comes to one player, but then we don't translate that to a different player because we view them as being silos. So I'll give you a great example. So Deion Dawkins had kind of a step back sophomore year. And one of the things he has openly talked about as being a factor in his step back sophomore year was the fact that he went from Richie Incognito next to him to Vladimir Dukas next to him. So if we know that that's a factor, if we know that having players around you who are not as good, because I don't know if that's a hot take. Vladimir Dukas is not as good as Richie Incognito. Didn't think that was a hot take. But having bad players on either side of you, right? Because Cody Ford wasn't overly good this year. Brian Winters was not good. Ike Butker may have been one of the most consistent guards on this team last year because John Feliciano was hurt for a lot of the year. And when you have Ike Butker, Mr. I've been a swing backup offensive lineman for seems like 9 million years, then all of a sudden he gets to play, like, okay, well, he didn't completely wet the bed, so that's good. And if that's the strongest thing that you can say about your interior offensive line absent Mitch Morse, then why are you not assuming that would have an impact on the interior offensive line? Because it does. And so I want to upgrade the interior offensive line positions next to him. I want to upgrade from John Feliciano. So we haven't talked about this yet, but I'm completely fine with John Feliciano walked. Because I want to upgrade from him. If you want to give Cody Ford another crack at left guard next year, give him another crack at left guard. Please, for the love of all that's holy and sacred, do not move him back to right tackle. But I want an upgrade from him. I mean, I want Landon Dickerson. I want Creed Humphrey. Give me a high interior offensive line. You know they're going to love Creed Humphrey. You, Anthony, they're going to love. The dude is a former wrestler who goes on missions trips overseas. You don't try and tell me they're not going to love Creed Humphrey. Creed Humphrey might be like a long-lost genetic twin of Sean McDermott. You try to clone him, shake all the things, turn the wrestler thing, just make him a little bit bigger. So those types of things matter for a center. Having good players next to you matters for a center. So I am completely fine keeping Mitch Morse. I think he's a good center, and I think you'll see it if you upgrade some pieces around him.
Holistically agree. I've been a big fan of Mitch Morse since we signed him, but really when Eric Turner and I broke down these struggles in the Bills running game in 2020, I got even more of an appreciation for Mitch Morse. And we were running schemes and plays up front that weren't suited to what he was doing. But the Bills offensive line had to adjust so much due to just poor play and poor execution and injuries and inconsistency up front, especially like you mentioned at that interior line position at the guards. No disrespect to Ike Bodker, but he's not regular starting caliber talent in the NFL, but he functioned admirably. Feliciano was inconsistent in his play. We'll get to it in a bit, but I, like you, am fine moving on from him, especially at his anticipated average annual value that SpotTrack hasn't pegged at. I'm not willing to give him that. But the Bills' offensive line, I mentioned it in several episodes, but just to put into perspective, when you're just thinking about the run game. So in 2019, the Bills ran 156 gap scheme runs. So pins, poles, powers, things like that. They ran 156 gap. They ran 110 zone runs in 2019. So decent balance, close, but more gap than zone. In 2020, so again, 2019, 156 gap, 110 zone. 2020, they ran 62 gap and 181 zone, almost triple the amount of zone to gap. And a lot of that was shown after about week 8, week 9, after Daboll and crew got a sense of, okay, we're not able to execute on this. We have to adjust and go from there. And Morse is such a good pin and pull center. He wasn't able to execute in and function in that role because of what was going on. And much like some of the other players we've alluded to, like Ed Oliver and Quentin Jefferson, well, we're not going to see Quentin Jefferson potentially being able to function back into the roles that they are more suited for and ideally built for in 2021. Mitch Morse is someone like that. And I really hate the Mitch Morse slander. I see a lot of people who think he's terrible or bring up the concussion history and say that he's done. And that's fair and valid to recognize the concussion history because it is a very serious thing. But he's a very underappreciated member of this team. And he's hugely important on that offensive line. The mental aspect between the ears, like you said, is phenomenal. His connection with Josh and his identification process is so key to this offensive line and to this offense as a whole. And the fact that he was willing to restructure and come back is an awesome piece and a testament to him as well. I wanted to get to this comment and donation from Truth to Hearts. Thank you very much for it. And he asked this question when we started talking about Quentin Jefferson and these releases in general. Is it possible that Bean is letting people test the market to see basically what they're going to get and then if he can match? What are your thoughts on that in regards to, I guess, Jefferson and Brown? Do you think Bean is letting them test the market a little bit just to see if they'll come back around, or do you think it's they're gone and they're gone for good?
The reason that people getting cut and then turning around and coming back happens so rarely is mostly because the agents know if there's someone willing to pay them more than what the team did. And because, tampering never happens, Anthony. That's not a thing. We're entirely on the up and up here in the NFL, and tampering never, ever happens. So because of that, you have scenarios where if you go to Quentin Jefferson and you say, "Hi, Quentin, it's Brandon. I was wondering if you'd be willing to take less money." And Quentin Jefferson turns to his agent and goes, "I don't know, Frank. Do you think I should be willing to take less money?" And his agent goes, "I don't know. I'll get back to you after I totally don't talk to other teams." So, Mr. and Mrs. Seahawks, let's say hypothetically, you had a defensive tackle who we're going to call, Benton Pefferson. Okay. So Benton Pefferson is a defensive tackle who has previously played for your organization and played really well, but he becomes available on the free agent market. What do you think a Benton Pefferson would really get? And the Seahawks go, well, I think I'd probably give a Benton Pefferson $6 million a year, hypothetically speaking.
Completely theoretical.
Completely theoretical. And then the agent goes back to Quentin Jefferson and goes, well, I think that, I think we get $6 million. That's what I think. And then they'll talk to the team and the team will be like, well, we want you to take $4 million. And they go, okay, well, just cut us then. And that's how that thing typically goes because there are discussions behind the scenes. And that's the reason why you don't see things like that happen across the league, not just a Bills thing. You don't see teams cut players for this reason and then have them come back around. That's just not something that happens. Most of the time, if you cut them, it's specifically for a little dance that is designed to specifically take advantage of contract structures. We saw the Bills do this at cutdown day last year, where they had kind of a, hey, we're going to cut you, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but you're going to come back right back around. They did it with Andre Roberts.
Yep. I was going to say.
If you remember, they did it with Andre Roberts. And because there was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Andre Roberts didn't go on his Instagram and say, peace out, Buffalo, I'm done.
Yep.
Because they knew that there was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge in place. And so those are the only times you really see that. So I'm not holding out hope that John Brown or Quentin Jefferson is coming back. In fact, to borrow from a different Jim Carrey movie, so you're telling me there's a chance. So you're like 1 in 100? I was thinking more like 1 in a million. So you're telling me there's a chance. So I think there would be a very, very, I would call it highly unlikely. If we're doing Bruceisms here, it's highly unlikely that anybody would be back.
I second that. I appreciate the question coming from Truth to Hearts and your donation as well. Again, thank you. And I think it's a fair question. I would never rule out anything. And granted, we don't know some of the things that are going on behind closed doors, but yeah, John Brown and Quentin Jefferson, I would say it's highly likely, to use a Bruceism, that they are not coming back, thus highly unlikely that they would return. And this is kind of the nature of the business at this point. But it's a fair question. It's a good thought. And now, again, there was a lot of news. The first 35 minutes or so of this episode was dedicated to that news cycle that has broke over the last several days. And especially today, again, it was a big deal, big news, a lot of information, a lot of player talk that has been discussed over this entire offseason that kind of came to fruition, came to a head a little bit today. And those moves, the John Brown cut, the Quentin Jefferson cut, the Morse restructure, the Vernon Butler restructure, although the numbers for Vernon Butler haven't been fully released yet, they all factor into the salary cap space that the Buffalo Bills now have available. So today we also got some salary cap news. The NFL salary cap for 2021 has been officially set at $182.5 million, which of course is down from $198 million that the cap was, well, $198.2 this past year in 2020. And for those of you who don't know, the cap this year in 2021 originally pre-COVID was supposed to be around $210 million. So a significant drop from where it was supposed to be in 2021. Again, a significant drop from where it was in 2020. And as of right now, after the John Brown cut, after the Jefferson cut, and after the Morse restructure, along with other rollover facts and figures coming from the 2020 season, even before factoring in the Vernon Butler official restructure numbers and figures, the Bills right now sit with roughly $18.2 million in cap space with the moves from today, of course, factoring in the top 51 contracts that you do for the roster there. So the Bills are sitting roughly at about $18 million of cap space. And that leads us to our expectations, because one of the realistic expectations, part of the realistic expectations that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, is that cost, that financial flexibility when it comes to any player. It's just part of the game. And one player we wanted to start with, one position we wanted to start with, is going to be linebacker. So brace yourselves as we start to get into some position groupings. Again, we're going to go through linebacker, offensive line, edge, corner, running back, and tight end. But keep those facts and figures and numbers in your brain. The NFL salary cap for 2021 being $182.5, and the Bills sitting at roughly $18.2 million worth of cap space at this very moment. So I'm going to switch the graphic for those of you watching live and those of you watching the video, and you'll see linebacker expectations in free agency. And the reason this one is leading off, a little peek behind the curtain and peek into a little view into behind the fourth wall there. We weren't going to lead with linebacker in this episode, but we did because yesterday, Lavonte David of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as much as I love Matt Milano, but Lavonte David was the best off-ball, in my analysis here, the best off-ball linebacker available on the open market. He re-signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers yesterday, a 2-year, $25 million deal, which is roughly $12.5 million in average annual value. A lot of people came out and started talking about, well, if he signed for that, that means Milano's going to get way more. And there were people on the other side that said, well, if he signed for that, Milano's going to get way less because he's better than Matt Milano. There's been a lot of thoughts, a lot of concerns. We're going to tie it all in now as we lead off here with linebacker expectations in free agency. Because again, the Buffalo Bills defense, nickel defense, those linebackers are tremendously important. You have to be rangy. You have to be a dog around the line of scrimmage. You have to be able to blitz. You have to be able to take on blockers. You have to be able to cover and function and wear multiple hats at all times, like Matt Milano did for the Buffalo Bills. So with him being gone, what are your realistic expectations for the linebacker grouping this offseason? Do you think there's a chance we bring Matt Milano back, especially seeing after what Lavonte David recently got? Or do you think this position is something we have to platoon and address in a different way in free agency, or even potentially look to the draft?
Okay, first off, Lavonte David is the most underrated player in the NFL and has been for a long time. And I absolutely despise the slander for Lavonte David that I see. And sometimes I'll have a kind of a discussion with somebody on Twitter or something like that, and they may ask me, because it's a popular comment, hey, who's the most underrated player in the NFL? Every single time my answer is Lavonte David. It is absolutely criminal how little respect Lavonte David gets in NFL circles.
Yeah, he's just been sitting in obscurity in Tampa for so many years.
I was hoping that them winning the Super Bowl and Brady going there would sort of shine a little bit of light on Lavonte David, but I think he's probably going to go his entire career. I have no idea if this is a hot take or not. I think Lavonte David is a Hall of Famer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have no idea if that's a hot take or not, but I think he's a Hall of Famer, and I don't think he's going to get there because I don't think people are going to go 5 years from now after he retires. They're going to be like, Levante, who was Levante again? I can't. It's literally it's the Bobby Wagner syndrome. Yep. Bobby Wagner is like the best linebacker in the league that no one has any idea how good he is, and it boggles my mind. I don't know if it's because it's a West Coast thing and Bobby Wagner's on later in the day and people are like, drunken themselves into a stupor by 4 o'clock. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I do think Milano's gone. And I'll tell you one of my biggest significant reasons why I think Milano's gone. Brandon Beane is starting to show a pattern with extensions. And that is if he identifies you as a key player, you get extended a year early. Dawkins, Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde. These are the extensions that Brandon Beane has given out to people that were homegrown under his particular regime. All of them were done with none of them going into a lame duck year. So far, people who have gone into lame duck years, Shaq Lawson, Jordan Phillips, Matt Milano. Now, Darrell Williams doesn't count because it's a 1-year deal. So when he signed, he was in a lame duck year. So you can't really use that for him. But they specifically extended last offseason Jordan Poyer and Deion Dawkins and not Matt Milano. And then this offseason, they extended Micah Hyde, who still has a year left on his deal. And meanwhile, the two people who don't have a year left on their deal and are getting ready to extend, off into free agent world, Matt Milano, Darrell Williams, didn't get re-signed. So I think Milano's gone. And that leaves you kind of scrambling for scenarios. Now, I will say one of the things I find to be interesting is I find it really interesting the structure of A.J. Klein's contract. And I want to talk about that for a brief second because we have been talking about Brandon Beane's ability to structure free agent contracts in a way that you can get out of them without being catastrophic to the cap. There is one contract that sticks out like a sore thumb when having this discussion, and it's A.J. Klein's. A.J. Klein's contract is not realistic to get out of this offseason, which means everyone else is kind of a 1 year, and we'll see. Quentin Jefferson just proved that. Everyone, the people we're talking about cutting, a lot of them were signed last offseason. And the reason we're talking about cutting them is because Brandon Beane built the contract so you can. Mario Addison, you can. Vernon Butler, you can. Quentin Jefferson, you can. A.J. Klein, you can't. One of these things is not like the other. And to me, that signifies something. The reason you can't cut Star is because you restructured him. Ron Beck pointed out in the comments. And Star. The reason you can't cut Star is because you restructured him last offseason. The contract was originally set up so you could get out of him now, but this particular restructure makes it so you can't get out of it. But A.J. Klein's contract was signed as essentially a 2-year, and we'll see. And it was signed, mind you, when they knew that Matt Milano was going to be a free agent the following offseason. So when I look at these things and I put them together, the fact that Matt Milano didn't get extended a year early the way that other people did, but A.J. Klein's contract was more of a 2-year and let's see instead of a 1-year and let's see, and you have the familiarity and the Panther factor with A.J. Klein, they might be really comfortable with A.J. Klein and Tremaine Edmunds. When we were all banging the table for A.J. Klein to be cut because he was terrible, I wasn't banging the table for him to be cut, but he wasn't playing well.
No, he was not.
When they were asked about him, they flat out said, we think A.J. Klein's doing fine. He's doing fine what he's asked to do. So you put all these things together and they might be okay with A.J. Klein. I'm not okay with A.J. Klein as a starting linebacker. But in addition, look at the contract. It's $6 million a year. I thought it was a pretty significant overpay when they signed him last offseason, but it's not a significant overpay if he's your starting linebacker. I agree. Lone Wolf in the comments says Klein is not a Milano replacement. I agree with you. I don't think he's a Milano replacement at all. He doesn't do anything in the coverage section that Milano does, and I don't think he's as good downhill against the run as Milano either. But
Agreed.
They might view him as such because of the comfort level.
That's a very good. I like the detective work that you did and tracing it back to the lame duck years and what Beane and company do for guys they extend. I'm also in the boat of Matt Milano not coming back, which also, again, has been a theme early in this episode. Also hurts my heart. Spot Track is pretty accurate at all times when it comes to contract stuff. I really swear by them. And so again, Levante David, his average annual value in the contract he signed yesterday was $12.5 million. They had him pegged at 12.7, so they were off by 0.2. Right now, they have Matt Milano pegged at $13.8 million for an average annual value. I don't know if he's necessarily going to get that and get 14 million, but I think he's going to get somewhere in that ballpark, and I could see him getting between 13 and 14. I don't think it's out of the question, and I don't see him coming back. And to your point, I think when we're looking at these linebacker expectations in free agency, I expect Matt Milano to not return. And then I also, whether it's in free agency or even with an eye towards the draft, I expect there to be some sort of platoon system at that other linebacker position. And even if my dream scenario for this draft, I have several draft crushes in this draft, but Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame, I've loved him since the beginning of this past season. He's been on my radar so much. Even he, who is phenomenal in coverage as a rookie coming out, potentially based on what he's done in Notre Dame, his speed and his explosiveness and his intensity, even with him, he's not built to holistically replace Matt Milano. Matt Milano's ability to function in space and in coverage and also be able to come downhill and wear multiple hats and do them all in one player is a very big deal and a very big thing that's overlooked. And I know people want to get on him and get after him about the Chiefs game and how he didn't cover well and so on and so forth. And I understand it, but I'm also not here for it. He's one of the best coverage linebackers in the NFL. I remember seeing the stat before, I think from 2018 to 2019, there was only 3 linebackers in the NFL who were better than him when it came to coverage. One of them, ironically, was Levante David. He's a phenomenal coverage linebacker, still very good coming downhill. Got better with his open field tackling and his tackling percentage last year versus the year before. I think he's going to get paid, and he does a lot as one person. Replacing him with AJ Klein, I don't think is, like you mentioned, I don't think is a like for like. I'm not comfortable with that. And if AJ Klein is going to be the quote unquote starter, I think that means they bring someone in either on the cheap in free agency, like an Anthony Walker, perhaps from Indianapolis, somebody who can function in coverage, or they're looking to draft somebody in round 2 or 3 and plug them into that spot to platoon with AJ Klein, because Klein is not built to cover on third down and go sideline to sideline and function in space. So my expectations for linebacker in free agency, much like you, I expect Milano to be gone. And then I expect to see someone brought in either in free agency or in the draft to then platoon with Klein so that way when you add them up together, they can add up to what Milano did all in one player. But I don't think, and what do you think about that? Do you think that there's someone on the market or in the draft that can holistically replace Milano, or do you think it's a platoon piecey kind of thing to add up to what he does?
I do think there's one person in free agency who can holistically replace Matt Milano, and I think it's KJ Wright.
Oh, see, I don't know about I'm a little concerned about his speed and how slow he is at times.
I think KJ Wright can play.
That's fair.
And I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think he has the wheels that Matt Milano, most people don't have the wheels Matt Milano has, because he's a converted safety. But as far as playing linebacker in a cover 3 or quarters based system, who does it better than KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner in Seattle? I mean, those 2 players have been on the top of all of the who are the best linebacker combos in the NFL for years. And I don't think the system change is very significant. I think that KJ Wright would fit in really well in Buffalo. I think he'd fit in really well in Las Vegas, because Gus Bradley is now the defensive coordinator in Vegas. And he runs that cover 3 quarter style coverage, who doesn't blitz a lot. You know, the Bills don't do that either. I mean, they blitzed AJ Klein a lot because, quite frankly, he's better moving forward than backward.
Correct.
But they really don't want to do that. They don't want to bring linebackers a lot. And I think KJ Wright can do that. Now, I will say that I think he's going to command a little bit of money. I think that this is a $6 to $8 million a year contract. But if you gave KJ Wright Quentin Jefferson's money for 1 or 2 years to platoon with Tyrell Dodson as a younger player and potentially drafted someone, I think it's a best case scenario, to be honest, about replacing Matt Milano, because the people I think in the draft that can do it, the 2 people that immediately come to mind are Owusu-Koramoah, like you said, and Jabril Cox. And I think Jabril Cox can play the coverage section as well as Matt Milano.
But forward.
However, going forward's a little different.
He's a liability right now.
I think that Jabril Cox is one of those people who, when I watch him fit the run, I go, okay, I think maybe I need a more dominant defensive line to make this work. So Jabril Cox is someone who I think is available on day 2, but he doesn't holistically replace Matt Milano either. And to be fair, I don't think Owusu Koromoa holistically replaces him. I think the only one who can is probably KJ Wright. And now you are going to sacrifice a little bit of wheels there, but you've got that veteran savvy. And to me, KJ Wright's a little bit like the Micah Hyde of linebackers. And what I mean by that is that's somebody who uses his instincts and his awareness of space to the fact that he doesn't really need to be a 4-5 guy. He can be a 4-6-7 guy, 4-6-9 guy, and still be good. Because if you watch the 40-yard dash, and I've talked about this a million times, if you watch the 40-yard dash, you know how they overlay certain people on top of each other? And you'll see one person who's like a step behind the other person. And the difference between the guy in front and the guy one step behind is 4-6 to 4-7-2. And you're like, oh my gosh, one step is the difference between 4-6 and 4-7-2. And then I turn around and say, that's what instincts represents. Instincts represents the difference between a 4-6 and a 4-7-2, because being able to make that step 1 second earlier, not 1 second earlier, but 1.12 seconds earlier is the same as just being faster. And that's why I'm cool with someone like KJ Wright. So I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think they're going to spend. And the reason I don't think they're going to spend is because I think they did that lost offseason with the AJ Klein contract. But I do think it's a possibility. Like, you could do it if you wanted to. I just don't think they're going to.
Yeah, KJ Wright's someone who's been on the radar. I've seen KJ Wright and even Jayon Brown from Tennessee, Denzel Perryman from the Chargers. I like the way you described KJ Wright, because it makes me think a bit of pitchers in baseball as you get older and you start to lose that 98, 99 mile an hour fastball, but you're still able to pitch and you're still able to command the zone. So you don't have those physical necessary like athletic tools anymore, but because of your veteran savvy and your know-how and your ability to get through and put yourself in the right position. I mean, even look at, despite the fact that the season didn't end well for them, Drew Brees, his arm has been kind of dead for the past several years, but his ability to read defenses and throw with anticipation, he's still able to function as an NFL quarterback to a decently high degree because of his savvy and his know-how and his anticipation. I like that in that comparison for KJ Wright being the Micah Hyde of linebackers. And there are some guys who can be put in that mix. Jabril Cox, is a good one that you mentioned. But yeah, like you, I watched the tape. I watched the college all 22, and I like him in coverage. He's fast. I am concerned when he comes forward. His run fits and his ability to narrow and constrict the running lanes isn't always there. His angles aren't always there. I recognize his speed and his athleticism. He's somebody that I think if you put him with Klein is functioning on first and second down. And then if you're rolling into 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6 or whatever, you're throwing in Cox because you know he can be rangy and he can function in that role and in that space. But I know there's been a lot of people banging the table for him saying we can just draft Jabril Cox and he can fit easily into Milano's spot. No. And again, you hit it on the head too with Koromoa. I love Koromoa. He's not a holistic replacement for Matt Milano. I don't know if even Bills fans are just underestimating what Matt Milano has done, but what he does in today's NFL, all in like one player, is a big deal. And I think with how many people have been easily thrown into be like, oh yeah, just get this guy to replace him, get this guy to replace him. It's a bit of a disservice to what he did on this team and the hat that he wore. But those are the expectations for linebacker. And we now move on to another highly talked about position. We spoke about it a little earlier when it came to John Feliciano. We're looking at the offensive line expectations in free agency. Right now, the Buffalo Bills have a hole at right guard and right tackle, and there are some players that are available. This position has been so newsworthy recently when it comes to, even today, Riley Reif right from Minnesota. The tackle from Minnesota was released. And then we've had the rumors and news that the Chargers are trying to trade or release guard Trey Turner. Andrew Norwell from Jacksonville, guard from Jacksonville, same thing. Kevin Zeitler, the guard from the New York Giants, was released today. There's been a lot of moving and shaking when it comes to the open market for the offensive line. Darrell Williams, brought in from the open market last year, had a very good year for the Buffalo Bills, especially in pass protection. But now he, much like John Feliciano, is a free agent. You mentioned earlier that you're very comfortable with moving on from John Feliciano. I am as well. But what are your expectations for the offensive line in free agency?
I would like to think we'd be able to get a deal done with Darrell Williams, mostly because the tackle market's not good. The offensive line market this particular year is weird because with all of the release and trade candidates, there's a lot of reasonable interior offensive linemen available right now.
Big time.
I mean, Tooney's out there. Gabe Jackson's available. Nick Martin, Kevin Zeitler, Alex Mack, Corey Linsley. You have Richie Incognito potentially out there. You have James Carpenter. You have all these people out there who are perfectly reasonable interior offensive linemen. But then you look at the tackle market and you go, okay, Darrell Williams, Trent Williams, who's going to get 20 plus million a year. So let's just go ahead and write him off. Left tackle, right? Riley Reif, Darrell Williams, Alejandro Villanueva, Tyan Secchi.
Yeah, I was going to say, then it's like Barron after that.
Ricky Wagner. You have Zach Banner, who I actually like, by the way. I like Zach Banner as a tackle because I feel like I made the comment previously that KJ Wright is kind of like the Micah Hyde of linebackers. I'm going to keep going with this general philosophy. I think there's a chance Zach Banner is the Jordan Poyer of offensive linemen. And that is he had very serious injury right when he was starting to show that he's a good player. And he's someone you could potentially get on the real cheap because there's just not a lot of sample size with Zach Banner, but he's still in his 20s. And I thought that he had sort of come into his own, was beloved in Pittsburgh and sort of come in his own. Everyone loved his story. And then he opened up against the Giants in 2020 and got hurt immediately, right after he was just starting to show what he can do in 2019. And so because of that, he bounced around to a couple different teams. I think he started with Indianapolis actually, but when he got to the Steelers, they loved him as a potential tackle. And then this happened and it kind of messed up. So Jordan Poyer in that same way started with the Eagles. I was actually a big Jordan Poyer guy coming out of college.
Oh, really?
Out of Oregon State. Huge fan. Then he got drafted by the Eagles. There's an old tweet of mine from like 2009 or whatever it was. It was a billion years ago before I was even using the Twitter account for anything because I had the Twitter account. I just wasn't actually active on it. Right. And it was just like, oh man, I'm bummed out the Eagles got Jordan Poyer. And then I went back and I found it not too long ago from like a billion years ago. Oh, but then awesome. He was, of course, a converted corner from Oregon State, didn't have the wheels to hold up on the outside. And they converted him to a new position. He finally kind of started to find his way in Cleveland and then had a very serious injury. And then the Bills were able to pick him up on the cheap. And that's how you get value. You get value by buying low on people. So my buy low candidate for offensive line is Zach Banner. Now, I'm not saying do that and count on him as right tackle. Right. I'm saying if you want to buy low on somebody, buy low on that. Now, I had Darrell Williams as the number one priority to re-sign over Feliciano, over Matt Milano this offseason.
Because of the positional value.
Because of positional value. And also because I thought that he'd be cheaper than Matt Milano. I thought Matt Milano would be a $13.5 million a year guy. And I thought Williams would probably be less than that. Now, the longer it goes, the more I think Williams might get paid just because of scarcity at the position. And you got to remember, he missed his opportunity to get paid before. He was an all-pro in 2017 with the Carolina Panthers, and then he missed his window. Very true. He got hurt. He had to go back to Carolina. They bounced him around. He didn't play as well. Then he had to kind of rehab himself into an upper echelon candidate for a year in Buffalo, and he became the best version of himself, which is good for him, good for us for 1 year, bad for us moving forward. And he's got a crack at how generational money for the first time in his career after, quite frankly, he probably earned it multiple years ago. So I don't expect him to take a hometown discount to stick around. So for me, right tackle is immediately becoming priority numero uno if Darrell Williams walks, which means I already established there's probably not a good place, not a good amount of people in the free agent market to get there. I mean, you want Ricky Wagner to kind of platoon with a rookie? Maybe. Okay. He can kind of hold down the fort for a little bit, but I would probably not be a fan of that, which means all of a sudden Tevin Jenkins and Leon Eichenberg are looking real good at pick number 30. So Tevin Jenkins is a bad man. He is a bad man.
I love him, but I love that he looks like a dude who like goes to Hogwarts.
Absolutely.
He's such a bad man.
He's such a bad. I feel like I saw someone, I don't remember who it was, but I saw someone make a comment when they were watching Tevin Jenkins film that he seems to take personal offense to pass rushers. Like he's like, trying to rush. Yeah, how dare you? Okay, he's busy burying you into the water boy on the side, and he says to himself, I have a lot of questions. First off, how dare you? And
nice offense reference.
Yeah, nice offense reference. That's what I do, man. You gotta, the hits just keep coming with Bruce, man. You got to keep on your toes.
I like it.
But I think that because of the scarcity of resources that you talked about, right tackle becomes Darrell Williams or panic. That's what it becomes. Those are your options. Darrell Williams or panic.
Same boat. When doing the salary cap special, Greg Thompson put it in phenomenal perspective, and it's a phrase that I've used before as well when talking about Milano and Williams. I think Matt Milano is a better linebacker than Darrell Williams is a right tackle, but because of the positional value combined with the positional scarcity of the tackle market this offseason, I put Darrell Williams, like the re-signing of Darrell Williams, at that number one priority spot for this offseason. And you hit it on the head with that positional scarcity. Riley Reiff coming available now is like nice, but now it's really like him and Darrell Williams for that potential like right tackle spot. Taylor Moton was going to be tagged by Carolina. Once that happened, Darrell Williams, before the Riley Reiff news, was basically not even arguably, almost kind of definitively the best available right tackle on the open market. And Spot Track has him pegged at 7.9 in terms of his average annual value. But I could see somebody swooping in and giving him 9.5 per year, or maybe even 10, signing like a 3 for 30. There's some people that are pegging him for a bit more. But with what we saw from Josh Allen this past year and the leaps and jumps that he made, this offensive line has to stay intact from a quality perspective. And I would like to see Darrell Williams come back. I don't necessarily know if he will because of the positional scarcity. I think he's priority number one for Bean and company in terms of bringing guys back or addressing that need in free agency. But I think we could piece it together. I like the Zach Banner. That's a very nice one. That's an interesting one. For me, I think this position gets addressed in the NFL draft. If Tevin Jenkins falls, I think O-line in general, even the interior O-line aspect as well. I think Feliciano, if he gets paid like Spot Trek has him pegged at that 8.4 average annual value, I'm out on that. Going back to the film in 2020, for as much as I love Feliciano's attitude and his mentality and his leadership and his culture fit, I don't think he produced on the field as needed, especially in pass protection, but even in the run game where he's really lauded and talked about. So I think that first round pick, especially if the Bills stay there and don't trade back, I think that's an offensive line pick as of this moment, whether it's at guard or whether it's at tackle. I think this position, in terms of the offensive line grouping as a whole, gets addressed in the first two picks, but most likely in round one, just because I don't know if they're going to be able to get somebody, especially a tackle, that is starting caliber other than Darrell Williams, or unless you're bringing in a guy trying to bank on what he could be and the potential to fit in and platoon with somebody that you draft maybe a little later. But I expect this position to be addressed, the offensive line as a whole, I expect it to be addressed in free agency. And then with that first round pick as well, the guard market is the biggest one that is intriguing me all of a sudden, because like you mentioned, all these guys that are starting to be released and getting thrown into the pool, all of a sudden there's more talent and the market is becoming a little more saturated for interior O-line play. I could see the Bills being able to get a quality starting right guard, or even potential two starting quality guards, although I think they've got Cody Ford penciled in as the starting left guard for 2021. I can see the Bills addressing starting right guard in free agency and getting a quality player just because of the positional availability, because it's not as scarce as tackle, and then seeing them go tackle in the first round of the draft. And man, if Tevin Jenkins fell, how excited would you be if he fell at 30 and then he was the starting right tackle for the Bills? Granted, depending on how things shook out.
I'd be very excited. I'd be very excited because I think that's your only opportunity to potentially even upgrade. Because I like Darrell Williams, but I think when you look at Tevin Jenkins, you think this guy has an opportunity to really be a high level right tackle. And the thing that pushes him down, you think, well, why is a tackle that good even available? Is because still to this day, NFL teams value left tackles over right tackles, even when they probably shouldn't.
1,000%.
And if you're a right tackle only guy, that has a tendency to push your stock down. So in case you're wondering why that is. Now, I think one of the things we have to point out about offensive line is that the reason why we're harping on it so much is because I'm okay with a little bit of sugar high Josh Allen, a little bit of YOLO Josh Allen, because quite frankly, there's a playmaker in there. But the time when that trips over the line into being, okay, now he's frantic, is the amount of snaps it's necessary. If he's running for his life because he's trying to make a play, so be it. If he's running for his life because he has to, because the line is bad, now this is when you start to get regression. You start to get regression to Houston Texans, Josh Allen. You start to get regression to Green Bay Packers, Josh Allen. This is when you get those things. I'm not saying those things are going to happen, but one of the ways you prevent that possibility from coming to fruition is by working on the offensive line. Because then when Josh Allen decides voluntarily to abandon the pocket to kickstart the scramble drill, that's a lot different than I'm forced off my spot every second because there's people breathing down my neck. And now I have to start feeling like I have to do it all by myself, and I start to get a little frantic, and you get some YOLO Josh. And I don't want a lot of YOLO Josh. I just want a little dabble of YOLO Josh. Small Josh. Yeah, in moderation. Take 2 of YOLO Josh and call me in the morning.
I had a feeling you were going to make that joke. That's well played. Well done.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's important that we talk about offensive line expectations and potentially the right tackle position being so important. Hey, you remember when we said we were only going to go for an hour, Anthony? Remember when that was? You remember when that was funny?
I shouldn't have even. I don't even know why. I feel like I jinxed it by saying it offline when I said that.
Yeah,
we both kind of jinxed it. Yeah, but same page. You've got a franchise quarterback now for the first time in God knows how long, who has made this giant leap and ascension to the upper tier of NFL quarterbacks. Lone Wolf said it right here. It all starts in the trenches. It does start in the trenches. And if we cannot protect Josh Allen and we cannot protect the franchise, you mentioned it earlier in this episode, the identity of this Bills team and what they are. They're a passing team. They're a spread offense. This team will go as Josh Allen goes. If you cannot protect him up front, then you not that all is lost, but you're not going to be able to maximize your capabilities and your potential for that offense for him. And then, like you mentioned, that's a very key thing, that regression that could be potentially possible if we start seeing him having to scramble and run for his life like he did against the Kansas City Chiefs, where he just had no time. And we saw the offensive line just get eaten up time and time again up front. We got to be able to protect Josh. I think this is a top, if not the top, priority for Brandon Beane and company, whether it's in free agency or the draft. It's just a matter of that positional scarcity at tackle makes it not all or nothing with Darrell Williams in free agency, but it's decently close. And that guard pool just, it seems like every day good guards are just coming into that open market. It's very interesting. I should have made that comment about us potentially going for an hour. So foolish. So foolish. Now we move on to the next position grouping, edge rusher. Expectations, stop laughing, in free agency, edge rusher, a position of need for the Buffalo Bills. We did not see the production in terms of sacks and I would say pressures as a whole, other than Jerry Hughes, who had a phenomenal year. And I feel like people need to recognize that, both Bills fans and NFL fans, that Jerry Hughes is still killing it. But at this point, he should not be the primary guy. AJ Epinesa looked very good towards the end of 2020. And as you have mentioned, he's a tremendously handsome man. I know that doesn't really relate to his on-field production, but I just thought it was worthwhile to mention because he is quite dashing. Edge rusher is a position that needs to be addressed. What are your expectations for it in free agency?
I think the Bills being willing to talk to JJ Watt tells you something. I do not think that it's it was a rare opportunity to get with a player who I really think was outside the plan, but we're willing to break the plan for JJ Watt. I don't think JJ Watt is the player at this stage in his career where you break the plan for him, which means if you were talking to him, it had to have been part of the plan.
Yes.
And so people bring up players like Trey Hendrickson, and they bring up players like Carl Lawson, and they bring up players like Yannick Ngakoue, and they bring up players like Jadeveon Clowney, and Solomon Thomas, who I don't think is a good fit, Romeo Okwara. I think that I would be interested in Okwara and Carl Lawson. I like Carl Lawson a lot. I think he's a 4-3 base end who got no help in Cincinnati from the rest of his defensive line. There's a reason why the Bengals are considering moving on from Geno Atkins. And I think that Carlos Dunlap being traded really gave Carl Lawson basically no help at all.
Big time.
And Carl Lawson is someone who I heard it referred to from a Bengals All-22 guy. He's someone who can really help create a lot for other people, but they're not able to capitalize on it because he's able to rush with power. I mean, Carl Lawson put up a lot of reps at 225. People forget how strong he is.
Yeah, he's thick.
He's really strong. And so that really fits well with the particular style that I think we've seen Sean McDermott have had success in his defense. If you look at people who have had success in Sean McDermott's defense from Carolina days, for example, it was the Greg Hardys of the world, right? It was the Charles Johnsons of the world. These are compression pass rushers. These are people who have the ability to not just attack your outside hip with hand motion, but long arm, bull rush, up and under, club moves. These are the things that allow them to be able to simultaneously rush the passer without sacrificing the ability to open up underneath rushing lanes, which is one of the things that we don't talk about enough. Speed rushers are great, right? Speed rushers also have an intrinsic flaw, which is over pursuing and looping out and then opening up rush lanes, not just for draws and screens, but also for rushing quarterbacks.
Contain.
And if you have someone who's strong as an ox and has the ability to go through an offensive tackle, because the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line, if you have those things happen, then you don't run into the containment issues that we saw from the Bills' defensive line against players like Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
So I think that could be a fit. I think Carl Lawson is a fit. I think Romeo Okwara is a little bit less of a fit, but I think that that's a possibility, someone who might still be kind of coming into his own. Again, it's about finding value. I don't think there's value there with Yannick Ngakoue. I think Yannick Ngakoue is going to get $15 to $17 million a year, and I don't think the value is going to be there. And so, I mean, if you don't want to do that, then you're left with people like Takaris McKinley, Vinny Curry, Ziggy Ansah, again, who the Bills, mind you, kicked the tires on last offseason. I'm not a Jadeveon Clowney guy. I've never been a Jadeveon Clowney guy, so that's not going to change for this particular scenario. Carlos Dunlap, I would absolutely be interested in Carlos Dunlap if he was able to come here, but he's not your long-term answer. He's a Band-Aid. He's your KJ Wright of the defensive line. You brought him in, but he's already in his 30s. So that doesn't change the need in the future. It just changes the need now. So if you bring in a veteran who's in his 30s at linebacker, you probably still have to draft somebody. If you bring in somebody who's in his 30s as a pass rusher, you probably still have to draft somebody. So you might be able to do one or the other, but probably not both, because then you're going into the draft and you still have needs. You might not have them now, but you still need to be able to have those holes plugged because the people that you brought in, you can't really count on for a long amount of time.
What are your thoughts on Hassan Reddick?
I don't know where he fits in this defense. I really don't.
Right.
Like if we had a Leo position in this particular defense, then okay. But Arizona's defense is very, very different than what the Buffalo Bills run. It's very different. And so when you look at, that James Betcher sort of tree, that stylistic tree of the Arizona defense, that's not even close to being what the Bills do. So when you bring in Hassan Reddick, what are you going to ask him to do here? Are you going to ask him to be Matt Milano? Because that probably wouldn't be good. Are you ask him to fill Lorenzo Alexander's role from 2 years ago? Because that maybe makes a little bit more sense, but I don't think Reddit's all that good at playing into the line of scrimmage on rundowns. So what are you going to have him do exactly? I just don't think it's a fit. If they signed him, I would go, okay, cool. I don't know what you're doing, but cool. Like, and I've said before that I do think the defensive scheme needs to be adjusted. Like, we do need to open it up to a little bit more multiple coverages of the back end. So one of the reasons why I want William Jackson as a defensive back from the Bengals, because I very much would like to have the ability to run more man coverage. So if they got Reddick, it might be a sign that they're going to evolve into something else. But of course, that would make me wonder, what are you evolving into exactly?
He's a name that's super intriguing for me because looking at his stats last year in 2020, he had over 400 rush snaps. That was the most that he's ever had in his career. His first year, he had like 220. And then in years 2 and 3, he had in the mid to higher hundreds, but he had more coverage snaps than he had anything. This past year was the first time that he was primary rusher coming off of the edge. And he was tied for 4th in sacks in 2020 with 13. Granted, 5 of them came in one game against the New York Giants. But he's someone who I keep finding myself coming back to and wondering, like, if they just played him as a pure edge rushing end, what does that look like, especially in the Bills defense? Because, again, it is drastically different than the Cardinals defense and the scheme and things that they were running in Arizona. And I wonder what he could potentially look like. But Carl Lawson, you mentioned, is a favorite of so many of us. He's still only 25 years old. Carl Lawson, he's pegged right now at Spot Track at an 8.8 average annual value. He was 6th in the entire NFL amongst everyone on defense in pressures last year. He was 4th amongst all edge rushers with 64 pressures last year. In the entire NFL, he was 25th in the entire NFL in pass rush grade. He was 9th amongst edge defenders. He had a very solid year. And what I like that you mentioned, Daniel Jeremiah tweeted this yesterday or Monday. He mentioned that with the quick passing attack in today's NFL, speed rushers still have their place. But what he was starting to notice is that pass rushers who have the ability, and you keyed in on the word, to compress the pocket and go through their man and bull rush and just get long arm, and whether they're just overly powerful or someone like Carl Lawson, who Ron Beck mentioned in the comments, is built like a Greek god with his stature and frame and power and core strength, his ability to be lower than almost every offensive tackle that he's coming up against, and his ability to generate leverage and get through his man and compress the pocket is a very big thing. And when Daniel Jeremiah said that, I started thinking about like teams that are successful in compressing the pocket and teams that generate pass rush. Because again, I don't think, and I believe you've said this before, or you and I have talked about it, sacks are not holistically indicative of a good pass rushing team. There is something to be said for pressure. And Carl Lawson, whether he's getting sacks or he's generating pressures on a consistent basis is still a big thing, especially when you have the talent on the back end of a Micah Hyde and a Jordan Poyer and a Tre'Davious White and potentially someone else at corner too. I like Carl Lawson a lot. And there are edge options in free agency and in the draft as well. And so my expectations for it, I think they address someone in free agency. I'm hoping it's someone like a Carl Lawson or literally Carl Lawson. But I think that position gets addressed. It gets addressed in free agency or gets addressed early in the draft. Granted, you can't plug every hole, but this one is definitely up there because, again, when you're that front four in a Sean McDermott defense, we have to get more out of that front four pass rush. I think Ed Oliver will be able to help a little bit more this year in the role that he's able to play, but we need more pressure and presence. I combine those two words into pressure. We need more presence and pressure off of the edge. Carl Lawson has really become a darling. I wanted him at the trade deadline as well. Him and Dalvin Tomlinson were like my deals. I also wanted Desmond King, but I didn't really think we had a shot at him. And that was also when Taron Johnson was not looking good, and then he turned out to be a hero. So I'm glad that didn't happen. But yeah, that's that expectation there of addressing that position. Ooh, Carl Lawson would be phenomenal. I just get excited even thinking about him. Now we move to the next position. and you spoke about it, William Jackson. William Jackson is a cornerback in the NFL. Cornerback expectations for the Buffalo Bills. Levi Wallace has done well. Dane Jackson is fun. I like Dane Jackson a lot. I am comfortable enough with a potential Levi Wallace, Dane Jackson rotation. The problem is neither of those corners address the speed or athleticism aspect in the secondary that we need to address in order to be able to run literally and figuratively with the Kansas City Chiefs. And it also doesn't jive with some of the thoughts and comments that Brandon Beane made with regards to the corner position and getting a bit more athletic and getting a bit more speed at that position. So what are your expectations for cornerback in free agency, and why is it that you think we're going to sign Patrick Peterson? No, I'm just kidding.
I would rather have William Jackson than Patrick Peterson.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
especially with the anticipated cost. I don't think that's
anticipated cost, age, athletic profile, trajectory, all those things. I think that when you look at cornerback, I am going to continue to expect that they value the things they value until they show me otherwise. Mm-hmm. So I want athletes at corner. And anyone who's ever listened to my show or knows anything about me at all knows my affection for coverage and corner specifically. I am a believer that coverage is more important than pass rush when it comes to pass defense. And it is based primarily on not only my own biases and observations, but the fact that the average time to sack in the NFL is always, every single year, higher than the average time to throw. Every single year, that's the case, which means on the average sack, the reason you got sacked is because you held the ball too long. And how do you make somebody hold the ball too long? You cover better. So for me, I'm going to continue to assume that I'm going to want athletes, and they're going to give me a scrappy guy who runs 4.62, who tackles well and is super aggressive.
Dane Jackson.
That's the fact of the matter is I'm going to continue to believe that. I like Dane Jackson, but Dane Jackson is a slightly more aggressive Levi Wallace. He's not a markedly more talented. He's not a markedly more talented athlete. If you look at the athletic profiles, a lot of people liked Dane Jackson. I like Dane Jackson. A lot of people liked him as a nickel because of how aggressive he is. Yeah. And I think that Levi Wallace has some aggressiveness issues at the catch point. And he has a tendency to get big boyed a little bit. And I think Dane Jackson's going to get big boyed a lot less. I think he's more aggressive at the catch point. He's more physical, but you still have the speed problems. And the speed problems at cornerback too don't allow you to mix and match your coverages the way you want. Because if you look at the anchors in this secondary, it's not Micah Hyde. It's not Jordan Poyer. It's not Tre'Davious White. One of these things doesn't belong. One of these things is not like the other. And one of these things can't run. And when you have a corner who can't run, then you say, okay, well, we got to run a lot more cover three, got to run a lot more quarters. Yep. And then you run those things and you come to the conclusion, hey, look, Levi Wallace is fine. But what is the opportunity cost of Levi Wallace? That's something that we should be talking about. What is the opportunity cost of Levi Wallace? What are you not running as a defense that you would be able to run if you had a better athlete? So give me a better athlete. Give me a better athlete in round one. I don't think they're going to do it, but give me a better athlete.
Eric Stokes.
30th. Give me Eric Stokes, right? Give me Newsome from Northwestern, right?
Yes, that 40 time was impressive.
The only reason he's available at 30 is because injury concerns and sample size concerns, but he has the talent to be a top 10 pick. So why are they available at 30, right? That's what you always have to deal with. In the free agent market, Brian Poole is a really good nickel. I pounded the table for him last offseason, and the Jets signed him to a 1-year deal, and now he's available again. He's 29. Give me Brian Poole. If you can't give me Brian Poole, right, then okay, that's fine. How about Mike Hilton, 27 from Pittsburgh? Good nickel guy. I like Mike Hilton. Outside corners, I already talked about William Jackson. How about Garyon Conley? Kick the tires on someone who has the talent and has been hurt. Again, what is free agency about? It's about getting value. And how do you get value? You buy time. That's what you do. You buy time. And so you get value by buying yourself time on task for a player who has a chance to outperform their contract for 1 or more years, thus allowing you to spend that capital elsewhere. You're literally buying time of that person's career that they're playing above their contract. That's what you're doing. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to try to buy low. And so when you have buy low candidates like Garyon Conley, for example, kick the tires on him. Worst case scenario, okay, you've got a perfectly reasonable athlete who didn't pan out, but he's not going to cost much. But we threw $6 million at Josh Norman last year.
Yep.
$6 million at Josh Norman. Are you trying to tell me you're not willing to throw $6 million at William Jackson? Because I am. So those are my expectations as far as cornerback in the free agency. I expect very little. That's what I expect. But what I want is all the things we talked about.
I hate being the person who's always just like, oh, agree with the person who is on the show with me. But I literally agree with everything you said there. I want an upgrade at corner too. But based on the pattern of behavior from being in company, I think we're still going to be going with, that scrappy 4'6" guy who's good in coming up and aggressive in tackling and someone at the catch point, but he's not going to be overly athletic or a burner. And I love the William Jackson idea. I am all aboard that train. Spot Track has him pegged at a 6.3 average annual value right now. He's 28 years old, runs a 4.3 740, so he's got that speed. He's got length. You mentioned earlier he's got coverage versatility and being able to run man and function in zone. And all jokes and puns aside in this aspect, being able to disguise your coverage on the back end is a tremendous thing in today's NFL. And part of the reason why Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are so valuable, because their versatility at the safety spot allows you to disguise coverage very well in the defense, and especially on the back end. This is a stat I have to say, this just proves how kind of in sync we are and aligned on that William Jackson aspect, even though it's just one player in that piece, because I took a lot of notes on him because I am a huge fan. He had a 52.2 reception percentage allowed when targeted last year in the NFL. Jair Alexander, Packers corner, phenomenal year, had arguably the best corner season in the NFL along with Xavier Howard from the Miami Dolphins. Jair Alexander allowed a 48.7 reception percent on 76 targets. So the guy who had arguably the best corner season in the NFL allowed to catch roughly 49% of the time on 76 targets. William Jackson allowed to catch 52% of the time on 69 targets. So 7 targets less and roughly 3% more receptions allowed. Somebody who's not being talked about. I think I really want to upgrade that position. Patrick Peterson has always been a favorite player of mine, and I've seen tweets of yours being against it, so I wanted to lead with that joke. But I don't see someone like that coming. I know a lot of people threw that out there like, oh, Patrick Peterson's available. Let's throw money at him. That's not going to happen. I also like a sneaky player. Taylor mentioned it in the comments, and he's someone I have in my notes as well. Jason Verrett. He had a nice bounce back year for San Francisco, someone who has had injury concerns, but when healthy, he's been a pretty solid corner, albeit if we can strike from the record when he got absolutely cooked by Stephon Diggs on that jerk route on Monday Night Football this past year in San Francisco. The last year in 2020, Verrett had the 22nd best coverage grade amongst all cornerbacks. He did allow a 68.3 reception percentage. He turns 30 in June. He's coming off a 1-year, $1.047 million deal with San Francisco. But because of those injury concerns, he's someone that I like to target as a buy low candidate. And he has that speed and he has some coverage versatility. There are aspects to add, whether it's in the draft, like you mentioned, or free agency. I have wants in free agency, much like you, but much like you, I think the expectations for a corner, I don't think we should be expecting much. I don't think even adding someone like William Jackson, who I would really love to do, I'm not even fully or holistically expecting that, which is sad to a degree, but trust the process, I guess. I want to pull up these comments, Bruce, because they are directed towards you. Truth to Hearts, again, thank you for your donations multiple times throughout this episode. Bruce, I'm going to pull up this first one, and then I'm going to go back to his other comment and donation. So this was his second comment. Time to pressure shows that defensive line is more important, i.e. in the pressure or the pressure versus coverage debate that you mentioned earlier. So Truth to Heart says time to pressure shows the defensive line is more important. And I also wanted to pull up his other comment there with the donation. Again, thank you, Truth to Hearts. Big fan of the show, and I love seeing you here every week, and your contributions are tremendously appreciated. But he also said here, you can't compare quote unquote time to sack to quote unquote time to throw. It should be quote unquote time to pressure, and pressure can literally happen immediately. Bruce, thoughts?
So I have considered this. You may find that shocking, but I have considered this when coming to the conclusion that coverage is more important than pass rush. And I think I would be on board with this idea if it wasn't true that in the absence of pressure, you still observe struggles the farther you go into a play. The longer you hold the ball, the worse the play gets for most quarterbacks, regardless of whether you're pressured.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been true. Pro Football Focus did an entire research project on this, when EPA per play related to time to throw in the absence of pressure. So without any pressure, EPA per play still takes a nosedive the longer you hold the ball. So it's not related to pressure. It's the fact that the coverage is messing you up and is causing you to have to hold the ball longer. Now the routes are open. You're trying to jumpstart a scramble drill, and not every quarterback in the league can make that stuff happen, which is one of the reasons why NFL teams have begun to prioritize quarterbacks who can play effectively in the second phase of the game. This is why Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, this is why those players are so important to people. This is why players like Josh Rosen are going to get devalued, and Matt Jones is going to get devalued relative to other people in his draft class, because you need to be able to have a quarterback who can perform effectively outside the first phase of the play. And the reason you can do that is because people intrinsically understand that the longer the play goes, intrinsically, the worse the offensive chances are of success. However, if you have Patrick Mahomes, that becomes an opportunity for a big play. If you have Josh Allen, it becomes an opportunity for a big play. If you have somebody else, it's not. And that's because people know that even in the absence of pressure, the longer the play goes, the worse it gets for the offense.
That's such a brilliant point. And literally think of, for everybody out there who's still kind of debating that, Bruce mentioned some of those quarterbacks. Think of your upper echelon, top tier quarterbacks in the NFL. They all accuracy, processing, pre-snap, post-snap, diagnosing, arm strength, all those proper mechanics, all those regular quarterback abilities and strengths that we talk about with the quarterback position that have been talked about since the beginning of time. But think of that escapability and that ability to create on the fly in that second phase that Bruce mentioned. Literally all of your top tier quarterbacks, Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen. I don't even want to keep naming everyone because I don't want to do anyone a disservice, but that ability to create in that second phase is such a big thing. And that's why coverage, to Bruce's point, people are on that coverage bandwagon and that coverage train of why it's more important than pass rush. But truth to hearts, I appreciate your question, and it's fine for you to, to each his own. And it's hard. I also get from that other side of it. You see such a dominating performance from the front four, from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, and then think like, oh my God, like pressure is easily more important than what's going on in the back end. But you don't realize the athleticism or the disguised coverage ability on the back end, or how the Buccaneers were able to run that too high look over 80% of the time against Kansas City. Because they have the athletes at corner, they were able to lock up and then still shade over the top and make Mahomes have to create and scramble a bit more than he would have liked. And because he was a little wounded on his little toe and the offensive line wasn't good, all those things that factor in. But it's easy to just see the immediate thing right in front of your face and be like, well, it's the pressure. We need to get better pressure. But that coverage piece cannot be understated. I'm also a huge fan of coverage, as, the name of the show should have indicated.
I am convinced that most of the reason why the vast majority of people are pass rush over coverage is because it's what you can see in the broadcast angle.
That's a very good point. It's right in that's your purview. You're not seeing what's going on in the back end.
I have a feeling that is kind of polluting us. And as a champion defensive back apologist, I am going to be out here changing hearts and minds. And at some point, here we go, like 20 years from now, after I have long retired and no one will have any idea who the heck this Bruce Nolan is guy, there'll be one person still doing this build podcast. I'm like, I used to know this guy named Bruce. And right now, everyone accepts coverage is more important than pass rush, but it hasn't always been that way. So someday, I'm one of those people who will be appreciated after I'm dead. Posthumously, I think that they'll appreciate me.
Yeah.
On my tombstone, it'll say, "That's the way the cookie crumbled."
Oh,
and
man.
One day somebody will walk by and go, "Wait a second, that's not Bruce's name." Oh my gosh, this was it. It'll be great.
This is him. And then they'll try and dig up the corpse and kind of use science and technology to put some sort of facial reconstruction together to figure out what you actually look like.
If you press the right code on the tombstone, it'll play my podcast that says wins aren't a quarterback stat. That'll be the thing.
That'll be fantastic. And then you'll also talk about how much you think running backs should get huge contracts when they're in their mid to late 20s.
And I'll roll over again in my grave.
You'll roll over your grave. And that segues us perfectly to
well played
RNA, right? A little bit. I got a couple tricks on my sleeve every now and again, despite the fact that I'm wearing a t-shirt. Running back expectations in free agency. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. A lot of people have been banging the drum for Najee Harris or Travis Etienne in the first round of the NFL draft, or even a big money signing like a Chris Carson or an Aaron Jones. Those questions have been thrown out. And as I alluded to, Bruce is a huge, massive proponent of giving huge money, big year contracts to running backs, especially as they get closer to age 30. So Bruce, I'll let you start here on the running back expectations in free agency.
So I just wrote an article earlier tonight that will drop on Buffalo Rumblings, and specifically the series of articles that I've been writing is what the Bills should do at this position. Mm-hmm. And my response to what the Bills should do at running back is very simple. Nothing. They should do nothing. It's a little bit like when you ask George Costanza what the show's about, and he goes, "It's a show about nothing." Nothing? Nothing. Right? So the one thing that I think the Bills should do at running back is nothing. They should do nothing. I am completely fine rolling in to 2021. Oh, Taylor. I know you don't think that. I know Taylor well enough to know that they don't actually think that. They're just doing it screw with me. Trade for Kamara, he says. Anyway, so I'm completely fine rolling into 2021 with Devin Singletary, with Zach Moss, and with a random third person. If you want to be really excited and think that's Christian Wade, then, so be it. If you want to say it's Antonio Williams, that's fine too. But the thing for me about the running back position is that if you look at the difference in our scheme and you look at the difference in our effectiveness from 19 to 20, you can't tell me it's the running back. The Bills ran against six-man boxes or less, fourth most in the NFL. Against that spot, they were 18th in yards per attempt.
Yep.
ESPN's run block win rate, they were 29th.
Yep.
The most positive, favorable run blocking metric for the Bills was 15th in PFF run block grade. That's it. That was the most positive thing that anyone had to say about the run blocking was middle of the road. That's it. That was the best thing. When the best thing that you can say to your wife about her new haircut is, "I don't hate it," then that's not good. So when I walk out and I go, "Sweetheart, what do you think of my, my new facial hair?" And she goes, it's not terrible. If that's the best thing, that means it wasn't good. Just for those of you out there who aren't married yet or need a wife translator, I will help you. That means it's bad. And it's the same thing with this particular situation. So the Bills were inches away from having the worst run block win rate because they were at 69% and they said they were 29th. The 30th, the 31st, and the 32nd team in the league were at 67.
Oh, so close.
So the Bills were inches away from being tied for the worst run block win rate statistic that exists in the league. Okay. So if you look at that, and then you look at the amount of zone runs versus the amount of man runs, which you've already talked about, when you look at that, you think to yourself, with a very significant shift in scheme and really bad run blocking, you can't look at this and tell me the problem is the running backs. I'm not saying that they're dynamic. Correct. I'm not saying that you're not right when you say they don't have game-breaking speed. What I'm saying is you don't need it. You don't need it. Vision and contact balance establish the floor for a running back. Everything else on top of that is gravy. So give me vision and contact balance to establish the floor that is necessary to have a sustainable, reasonable running game in a pass-happy league where having dynamic running backs is not really necessary, and I'll be fine. And that's what I have. I'm not saying they're all-stars. I'm saying they're fine. And when you have limited resources, especially this offseason, I have no interest in signing an RB1 or spending significant draft assets on what I would consider to be a luxury. It's a little bit like going and buying a hot tub on your credit card when your fence is broken. And I'm not interested in doing that. So
buy a fence.
Yeah, buy a fence. It has utilitarian purposes. Buy the fence. Don't get a hot tub. Listen, I know it's going to feel good, and I know you're stressed, and I know you deserve it. You work hard.
And bubbles and jets are fun.
And that's awesome. But as far as prioritization goes, it's really low for me. So my expectations are they might do something, but based on Brandon Beane's comments, he specifically said, not all on Devin Singletary. We don't look at those two players, he said. We don't look at those two players and think they let us down. So, okay. I'm going to expect they're probably going to do very little, if anything, at the running back position. And I'll be completely fine with it because, as I said, my goal is for them to do nothing.
That comment from Bean was very telling, along with the comment about wanting to get more athletic up front on the offensive line when talking about the struggles in the run game. And you hit it on the head again. I think it's easier for people to diagnose problems in the running game and just think, oh, well, it's the running back. It's harder to diagnose and recognize the change in scheme up front and how much zone you're running versus gap and man scheme, or how are you executing your pin and pulls, or what's the proper leverage that your offensive line is using. It's easier to just diagnose and be like, well, it's the running back. Well, it's the running back, especially when you have running backs like Singletary and Moss who are not tremendous game breakers or tremendously dynamic. And to your point and to this segment, the running back expectations in free agency, I do not expect any, especially the bigger break the bank signings. If you are someone clamoring for Aaron Jones or Chris Carson, bless your heart. I think both of those guys are fantastic. I've had them both on my fantasy teams over the last several years. Those guys are not coming to the Buffalo Bills. And I love Travis Etienne and I really like Najee Harris, but to use a first-round pick on a running back, again, Bruce, as you said it, to use those resources when they're so limited, both in terms of financial resources and draft capital resources, to use those early or to use significant resources on a running back with this offense and in today's NFL, I just don't think the return on investment is there. And I mentioned it on a previous episode of Disguise Coverage. That first round pick comes with that 5th-year option. I want to use that 5th-year option for an offensive lineman or an edge rusher to have some sort of cost control at a high positional value. I don't want to sit there with a 5th-year option for a running back and pay him that on his 5th-year option when you can kind of pull guys off the street or in different rounds, especially later in mid rounds, and have them be super effective. The Alvin Kamara joke from Taylor earlier. Alvin Kamara, for me personally, a little peek behind the curtain, he's my favorite player in the NFL. I love him as a player. He's just awesome to me. I would not pay Alvin Kamara the contract that the Saints gave Alvin Kamara. I would not trade for that contract from Alvin Kamara. And Kamara, also ironically, despite the fact that he's so well paid now, former 3rd-round pick. You get so much value in other areas from the running back position. I want to see some sort of new dynamic added to the running back grouping, whether it's long distance, home run ability, speed, or if it's someone like a James White, a quality route running running back from the backfield who can line up in multiple positions and in multiple formations on the offense and who can create mismatches. Give me a mismatch creating running back. So I'll take James White. I would love to see that, especially if he can come in on a 2 or 3 or even 4 average annual value, but the lower the better. Or even Jamal Williams from Green Bay, or Mike Davis from Carolina, who looked very dynamic when filling in for Christian McCaffrey. Although, again, the sample size is smaller, but again, value in that position. We cannot be sacrificing whether it's money or draft capital in the running back position, because exactly like you said, Bruce, that it's nice, but it's a luxury. We do not need a hot tub right now to make this house fantastic. We have people who keep sneaking into our backyard to use our patio and our fire pit in the back. So we need a fence. We need a fence. Let's build a fence. It would be nice if we got a hot tub. Cool. But that is last on the priority list. And I don't expect the Bills to do anything big or huge when it comes to the running back position. What I do think is interesting, the fact that they were in on Le'Veon Bell is still something that sticks in the back of my mind as they recognized, and I heard a little from you on that, the fact that they were willing to do that. And granted, maybe it was just middle of the season, low risk, potential high reward, but the fact that they were willing to be so in on him, whether it was his caliber of play or the dynamic that he represented, I thought that was a very interesting thing, and that still sticks in the back of my mind. If you care to comment on that based on your feel free.
That was a fascinating thing to me. To me, the Le'Veon Bell scenario struck me as an opportunistic move, a la Kelvin Benjamin.
Oh,
you're in the middle of a season. You have a perceived flaw that you want to test out to see if rectifying it by the addition of one player could potentially get you somewhere. And, you fiddle around and you go, okay, what about somebody who's got really good vision? Someone who's known for their hesitation and their vision. What if that meshes well with the more zone heavy style that the Bills want to run? Well, who's good at that? Well, Le'Veon Bell is good at that. Le'Veon Bell has one of the best sets of eyes on any running back in the last decade. And so you think to yourself, okay, is this an opportunity for us to make a move? That doesn't necessarily mean that they're in on running backs, but they might just be in on that particular skill set with this particular opportunity. Somebody said in the comments that, the hot tub might not be a good idea, but what if it comes with a babe? That's what they said. Well, what if it comes with a babe?
I didn't see that.
First off, this is really important. My wife is a babe. So
let them know.
It's important that y'all know that I already got one of those. I don't need one of those. So for me, it's just straight up fence versus hot tub. So
I like that.
Yeah.
Way to pound the table for your wife. That's a good husband right there. Values. That's what this podcast is all about.
Absolutely. Well, actually, family values, draft values, monetary value, family values. Everything in life is a value proposition, Anthony. What you give versus what you get. It applies here. It applies in draft capital. It applies in free agency. It applies in marriage. Return on investment. As a newlywed myself, I am very happy with the return on investment that I have made into this marriage. And I'm definitely not saying that because I'm scared of my wife. So as we start to wind down, I am loving the engagement that we're still rolling in. As the comments have mentioned and Bruce and I have joked about, we went much longer than initially anticipated. We're coming up on 2 hours, but the content, in my opinion, but I'm probably biased, has been fantastic so far. And the engagement from everyone still rolling with us live from start to finish and people coming in and trickling in now has been awesome. And we're starting to wind down now with our last position grouping to address here. And that is the tight end, the expectations for tight end in free agency. I alluded to this earlier when speaking about bringing in players that will tell us how the front office and the leadership view a player. When it comes to the tight end, I believe this position will be addressed in free agency, but the type of free agent that is brought in free agency for the tight end will tell us what the Bills think of Dawson Knox. If it's somebody that is a support piece brought in on a 1 or 2 year cheapy kind of deal to function in some 12 personnel or potentially allow Knox to continue to develop because he is raw. I recognize that fully. Or if the Bills do something crazy like go after Zach Ertz or take the money from John Brown and go for a Jonnu Smith, that tells you a little bit how they view Dawson Knox. That's just my initial start for that. But Bruce, you of course are my guest. So I will let you lead off this segment as I have for all the others as we start to wind down here. What are your expectations for the tight end position in free agency for the Buffalo Bills? as telling as the conversation was about Brandon Beane talking about the running backs, I think it was more telling him talking about the tight ends. And he said, listen, we never really got to a point where people were afraid of our tight ends. Now, obviously, we'd love to have a player like the guy we just played, which he was talking about, Travis Kelce.
Man.
He said, but they don't make those players everywhere. So for the Bills, you think, okay, does that mean he wants Dawson Knox to become that guy? Or he thinks Dawson Knox isn't going to be that guy? And that changes things for me. So I'll tell you my personal opinion. My personal opinion is I don't want to spend significant money on a tight end in free agency. And I'll tell you why. If you spend $8-9 million a year on Jonnu Smith, or $7 to $8 million a year on Gerald Everett, or you trade for Zach Ertz, who's $8 million a year cap hit, or you sign Hunter Henry for 10 plus, that means one of two things. Number one, it means that you think Dawson Knox needs to be usurped right now. I would disagree with that. I think it's really funny how we're willing to give a really raw quarterback prospect endless amounts of patience, but we're not willing to give a converted quarterback any patience when it comes to this being a tight end. So Dawson Knox was a converted quarterback from high school who basically played off the shoulder of the offensive tackle and in the backfield in college as a move blocker. Didn't catch a single touchdown in college. Watching Dawson Knox film was boring as all get out when I watched him come out. I was bored to tears watching Dawson Knox tape because he didn't do anything. They didn't let him do anything.
He didn't do anything.
He didn't do anything. It wasn't his fault. It's not that he can't. He just didn't. So your first option is if you spend that money, either A, you think Dawson Knox should be usurped right now, in which case I would disagree that you usurp a player with that trajectory right now going into year 3. Or B, you want to run a lot more 12 personnel to justify the investment that you just made, which I would also disagree with. And I would disagree with that because this is a wide receiver centric offense. And you just had the best offensive year in the history of your franchise running a lot of 11 and a lot of 10 personnel.
Yep.
So if you want to spend big money, one of those two things has to be true. Either you want to bring in a tight end 1 who will replace Dawson Knox right now, which I'm not in favor of, or you want to run a lot more 12 because otherwise you wouldn't be able to justify the investment in a big name, big money tight end. It can only be those two things. So either you run a lot of 12 because we do run some 12. We run a little bit of 12, a little bit of 13. And so I want an upgrade for 12 too. But to be honest, there's a lot of people who are an upgrade from Lee Smith in receiving sets as 12.
That's true.
I think Deion Dawkins might be an upgrade. So I think that there's a reasonable chance that you can get that without spending $8 to $9 million on a tight end. Because if you spend significant money on a tight end, one of those two things has to be true. Either you're willing to give up on Dawson Knox as a starter right now, or you want to run a lot of multiple tight end sets to justify the investment. Neither one of those things am I a fan of. And so because of that, I'm like, I want to bring in somebody. Dan Arnold's been popular. I'm cool with Dan Arnold. Jared Cook, if you want to bring him in on a cheap deal because he's older, right? He's 34. The only reason he's going to get a cheaper deal than people like Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, even though the production for Jared Cook was 466. The production for Dan Arnold was 470. And the production for everybody that people are drooling over, Jonnu Smith was in the 400s. He was 448.
Yep.
The reason why you're going to pay more for Jonnu is because he's younger and more athletic. So I can get a similar level of production who just happens to be, older and less of a market for him. If I can get him cheaper, and if Dan Arnold can come here for $3 to $4 million a year, then I can get that and draft somebody on day 3 who can come in and be productive as a blocker right away. I suggested Tommy Tremble, who I'm a fan of a couple of weeks ago.
Notre Dame prospect.
So when you have scenarios like that, you have to kind of tell me what you want to tell me by your actions. And if you want to bring in a lot of money on tight end, you're telling me something, and I'm not in favor of either of the things you're telling me.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
We spoke about this earlier with Gabriel Davis and kind of banking on the hope or the continued trajectory and rising. When it comes to Dawson Knox, what makes you more comfortable, I guess, with him being that type of one? And also tied to that, you mentioned the being patient with Josh Allen type of thing, but not being as patient with Dawson Knox. Has Knox shown, well, he obviously has, but has Knox shown you enough that he's made you think like, okay, hope and faith will be restored at this point in his career? Like he's obviously shown you enough to make you think that that trajectory is going to be reached and going to be realized. I'm
really glad you brought this up, because on the surface, you might think this is hypocrisy from Bruce. You might think, well, hold on a second. You just said don't assume improvement from Gabriel Davis. Aren't you assuming improvement from Dawson Knox? Well, the answer is no, because if Dawson Knox doesn't improve from year 2 to year 3, there's no harm, no foul there, because this is a perfectly reasonable offense just the way it is. So I don't have to assume. I can hope that he improves and not have any of the significant drawback if he doesn't. And that's the difference. So in addition, you have scenarios that are outliers. So for example, Josh Allen threw 600 passes in college. That's like nothing.
Nope.
So when you look at him, is there a reason for me to give him more time? Is there a reason that this guy deserves more time? And for Josh Allen, it's yes. Coming out, everyone said he was a project quarterback. So people who are willing to write him off after 1 year, I'm like, you said he was a project. What does project mean to you? It's like deciding you're going to paint your house and then you get through one wall and you're like, this is stupid. I'm not going to do this anymore. What did you not know what you were getting into when you did that? So for Dawson Knox, if you know where he comes from, if you know that he's a converted quarterback, if you know that he got basically no reps at all in the pass tree, and when he did, he ran like 3 routes at Ole Miss, and you think to yourself, we're basically drafting this guy because he's a ball of athleticism who has the right mentality. Does that sound familiar to you? We drafted Josh Allen because he was a ball of traits.
Sorry, wrong quarterback.
Oh, I can't stand you. Oh, you Anthony's. You can't see me. I'm shaking my fish at you. Anyway, but we drafted Josh Allen because he was a ball of traits who had the right mentality. We drafted Dawson Knox because he was a ball of traits who had the right mentality. So the reason why I don't think it's the same discussion with assuming Gabriel Davis jumps versus assuming Dawson Knox is, number one, I'm not assuming it. He might not. And number two, if he doesn't, I'm fine with that. If he doesn't, there's no harm, no foul. If Gabriel Davis doesn't step up and people adjust, or if Stephon Diggs gets hurt and Gabriel Davis is now your number one, now you're in trouble. If Dawson Knox doesn't take the next step in 2021, okay, no problem. Start over again. And that's the difference. The stakes are different, and the reasoning behind the patience is different.
Very good way to break that down. Very good way to break that down. It's a very intriguing discussion for me with Knox because I don't want to bank on the hope, but also to your point, I recognize if he doesn't develop, is it really the end of the world? But also at the same time, I would like to have a higher floor and have a bit more assuredness when it comes to that position. If we have enough money, which we probably don't, Jonnu Smith is really nice. I like what he adds and I like what he does, but I recognize the financial commitment. That's a lot. Same thing with Gerald Everett, who's pegged at like 7.3 average annual value. Jonnu's pegged around a little over 8, and then Hunter Henry is like 10.9, so basically 11, which would put him into the easily into the top 5 paid tight ends in the NFL. And I don't think the Bills are committing that much money to the tight end position. I like the smaller supplemental support and or even minor upgrade. I like Dan Arnold. I have one that it may sound ridiculous. Richard Rodgers.
Not ridiculous at all.
Really just, I watched him a lot with Philly because I had Miles Sanders last year in fantasy and decided to torture myself every week and watch the Eagles not give him the ball when he should. And Richard Rodgers stepping in when Zach Ertz went down Granted, Philly runs a ton of 12. That's basically their base personnel for offense. But he functioned really well. 28 targets, 24 catches in 2020. He was productive in Green Bay. He's somebody that has been able to get on wherever he's gone. Granted, he's played with quality quarterbacks. Nobody go crazy here that I said Carson Wentz is a quality quarterback, but he's functioned well. Granted, he's never been the pure number one top line tight end, but signing somebody like that, who you could literally get Richard Rodgers on a 1 or 2 year deal for like the vet min or like $1 million or $2 million per season and allow him to function with Dawson Knox. And then you can still run some 12 personnel. You don't have to worry about a high return on investment for that. And you even have the opportunity, if Knox really falls off a cliff, I don't think it's crazy to say that I'm comfortable with Richard Rodgers stepping in and being the tight end for the offense, given the production that he's had. And again, that investment on that position, the value that you're getting, sinking a couple mil into a guy to run 12 because you want to run more 12 personnel, I'm fine with, or a guy who can push Dawson Knox or even usurp him, to steal your word, if Knox falls off a cliff. I'm very comfortable with that. But yeah, it's a tricky notion and tough waters to navigate, because if you are signing somebody big, again, if you're bringing in Jonnu Smith, that means you either want to run 12 a lot, or that means you think Dawson Knox is done. So it's very, very indicative of where that offense is going to go and what they think of Dawson Knox. And as you mentioned, Bruce, there's a lot of contradictions and things that leads to with the offensive philosophy in terms of what the Bills have been and where they continue to go going forward. It's very intriguing.
I have a deep, deep, deep sleeper for you.
Okay.
Jake Butt.
Wow.
Yes. Crazy deep sleeper. This is someone who has been hurt so much in the last 2 years.
I liked him coming out of
that
Michigan.
People just forget about him.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of positive buzz about him coming out of Broncos camp last year. And then he got hurt again.
Yeah.
And I actually thought he flashed a little bit in 2018. And then he got hurt in 19. And then in 20 comes in and gets hurt again. But super deep sleeper, vet minimum, potentially high payoff. Sure, why not? I'm not saying mark him in as tight end 2, but if you have Jake Butt versus the hedge against Tommy Sweeney at tight end 3 because you didn't get a chance to draft somebody, sure, why not?
I like that. That's a very deep sleeper. I like that you brought that. That's a good one. Also appreciate you, Justin. I appreciate you, Justin, appreciating us and the conversation we've been having on this episode that went for significantly longer than Bruce and I planned. We're starting to wind down officially. I'm throwing up, if you're watching the live stream or the video, just in general, I'm throwing up the toodles, you guys, which means Bruce and I are going to start saying our goodbyes officially in this episode. I want to, again, I mentioned it earlier, I want to thank everyone for tuning in live to this episode. The engagement has been tremendous. The steady viewership has been tremendous, but the comments and questions and thoughts and donations, any and every single person that has been riding with us on this episode, whether it was for a minute or for the entire over 2 hours that Bruce and I have been live here, thank you so much to each and every one of you. It's been tremendous. And Bruce, as always, a tremendous thank you to you. I've said it a lot. You are one of my favorite Bills people in the world, and that's whether it's a podcaster, professionals, anything and everything. Your takes, your analysis, you make everyone a better Bills fan and a better football fan for listening to you because of your content, because of your takes and your analysis and the way you're able to break it down. So thank you to you for coming on and being a great guest as always, and being agreeable to me as we had to pivot. For those of you who are regular watchers and listeners, I usually go on Thursdays for disguised coverage, but we had to pivot. We have a bit of a super show this week for Cover One, which is happening tomorrow. So I pivoted to tonight, and Bruce was able to adjust with me at the last minute. And yeah, I appreciate you as always, Bruce. And why don't you tell the good people of this pod and this nation where they can find you, what you do, and what your address is and what you look like.
Nice try, FBI.
So close.
I am Bruce Nolan. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. I am the host of The Bruce Exclusive, which is a Buffalo Rumblings podcast that drops every Thursday and Friday on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. Anthony, thanks so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. The Cover One guys have been great to me. You've been great to me. You guys have been so gracious to me and allowing me come on your show and talk to your listeners and kind of intrude your live shows here. The guys in the comments, thank you so much, folks, for you guys in the comments who have engaged and have listened and have, given encouraging remarks and have engaged with us intellectually and made wonderful counterpoints. And you make this thing go. And when I say this thing, I don't just mean this particular show. I mean, you make this idea go. The fact of the matter is there are content creators for the Bills because you are super fans.
Yes.
You don't get on at 9:00 on a Wednesday and go for 2 hours with us unless you're a super fan. You don't do it unless you do that. The only time you do this is because you're a super fan. So your fandom and your joy about consuming Bills content is the reason why we exist. So thank you so much for being you, because you allow us to even be here. Because if there wasn't a demand for it, the market wouldn't exist. But you guys want it so bad that you have actually created the roles that we fill. Content creation was not a thing 25 years ago. It is now because you constantly want more content. And so I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Anthony, who does an amazing job every week. Thank you for being a part of this scenario with me. And I appreciate you having me, Anthony. Thanks a lot, man.
Oh, of course. And I appreciate you being so gracious and humble. Thank you to Taylor throwing out the donation at the end there. Always a dude who I enjoy having in the live chat and interacting with on Twitter. Thank you so much, Taylor. One of the comments in the chat, Bruce, was that we should go for one more hour. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah?
I think my wife would kill me. That's what I think.
I
and it's not because of my haircut this time.
Oh, I like how you brought it full circle. Way to bring it all back.
Stand-up comics do that all the time. They bring back the last joke, which happened to be the first joke. That's what we're doing.
And that's what makes it so funny, because it ties in together and it gets a huge laugh at the end. And then they sign off and say goodbye, as we are about to do now. But Bruce hit it right on the head, as he always does. Without you guys, there would be no us. So tremendous thank you to everyone. Engagement, donations, listens, views, downloads, word of mouth, encouragement, or just telling your buddies, family, friends, whatever, to check out this pod or check out this or follow this person on this. It's awesome. It's fantastic. Bruce and I appreciate you guys so very much for tuning in and listening to this episode. Follow Bruce on Twitter. Check out the Bruce Exclusive. It's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. I, of course, am Anthony, your host here on Disguise Coverage. Find me on Twitter at __Ant. That's pro, 2 underscores, ANT. I will be going on Monday next week to recap some things going on Monday when legal tampering starts at 4 p.m., potentially having some guests on that show. So it's going to be a big deal next week. So keep your ears and eyes open and stay tuned to when Disguise Coverage will be going live for next week as we start to really get revved up and cranking into this offseason, into free agency and leading up to the NFL draft. Thank you again to everybody for tuning in. Massive, massive thank you to Bruce for being on the show and being great as always. Thank you guys very much. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones all stay safe. Take care of one another. As always, go Bills, and I'll see you guys next week.